This episode is brought to you by our partnership with Grand Canyon University. Welcome to the Ignite Project, a Polk County Public Schools podcast made for teachers by teachers. Teachers of all experience levels need each other's enthusiasm and passion to fuel an ongoing desire to do what it takes to meet the needs of our students. And that's what this podcast is all about. Be energized by their enthusiasm to ignite a love for teaching while they challenge others to join them in their work. Join us now.
Hey there, welcome to the Ignite Project. I'm Jessica Solano, Teacher Engagement Leader here with Polk County Public Schools. And today we have the honor of bringing on Krista Stanley, who is the 2021 Florida Teacher of the Year from Okeechobee County. Welcome, Krista.
I'm so happy to be here.
Oh, we're glad to have you here. For those that don't know, the Florida Teacher of the Year, which you were just named in August of 2020, they get a year sabbatical. They get to work with other teachers throughout the whole state of Florida, also with the Florida Department of Education and other state teachers of the year. But in that year that you get to do that, you really get to network and kind of see the huge, broad picture of education that sometimes we miss when we're just in our classrooms focusing on the important, obviously, the kids that are right there. So how's this year been for you?
It's been incredible. I've learned so much about education just across the state of Florida. And it's been such a unique opportunity to be able to elevate and celebrate teachers across the state. Yeah. And so it's definitely an honor, and I'm just so thankful for the opportunity.
That's awesome. I know. I think you're such, even just getting to speak with you just recently, such a great representation and being positive, and more so now than ever, because obviously there's plenty of reasons to be kind of feeling the frustration and the craziness that is our world right now. But I know that it's really powerful to get you to have a positive outlook and present teachers well. So
absolutely.
You're doing an awesome job.
Thank you.
Well, and so a little background on Krista. She is a sixth grade math teacher from Okeechobee County. She graduated from FSU with a bachelor's in business management, then became a teacher. And she actually is teaching in Okeechobee County where she went to school for grade school. So you were saying earlier, are teaching in the same classroom that you went to school in?
So my first math classroom as a teacher was my sixth grade math classroom as a student. So it was definitely just amazing and awesome to walk into that classroom and know that I learned in there and now I'm teaching in there. So it's not my classroom anymore, but I spent my first 3 years in that classroom. So it was really cool to share that with the students every year and to share my experience as a middle school student with them.
Yeah. That's so awesome. It must be so surreal. Like I sat right there and now I'm teaching.
Yes,
that's
exactly.
Amazing. Very cool. Very cool. Well, and we're glad to have you on the show because as a Florida Teacher of the Year, you're always tasked with having this message. You always want to elevate teacher voice and recognize the teachers that are there, but then also you have your own message. It's not even necessarily someone giving you, hey, this is what you got to talk about this year. And so in talking with you, your message, and we wanted to really bring on the show, is about helping teachers and students reach higher. So especially right now, at a time like this, I feel like everything comes back to, but like, how is that happening in COVID?
Yes.
In a time like this, and then even ongoing, why have you chosen reaching higher as your message?
So I would say it kind of goes back to my first year teaching. So this is my 5th year as an educator, and I spent the last 4 years as a 6th grade math teacher. And like you said, I have a business management degree, so I did not go to school the traditional pathway to be a teacher. And my experiences really, when I came into the classroom, were from my family, who I had several educators in my family, my mom, my dad, my sister. And so my experiences were really just from listening to them. And so, nothing can prepare you for that first day in the classroom with students. And I remember being so excited and eager to support students and to help them through those middle school years. And it was a great year, but I also had a lot of struggles. And I wasn't as prepared as I should have been, and or as equipped as I could have been. And I think that reaching higher to me is about taking those struggles that we have and turning them into successes. And so every day when I would go home and I would reflect on that day, it was thinking, how can I be better tomorrow? And I think that summer is really where I was impacted. But, I had several students that year that I reflected on at the end, and they really were my inspiration as to why I wanted to be better the following year. It always came back to the students. I had one student, his name was Juan, and he was a great kid, but he had been retained in elementary school and often displayed behavioral problems in class. And I struggled to support him. And it was because I wasn't equipped with the skills to meet his needs. And I remember one day being in front of the classroom, and I was teaching a whole group lesson, and, I had high spirits, and I had prepared for the instruction, and I was standing up there, and he was sitting in the back of the classroom, and in the middle of the lesson, he started making these noises that sounded like a dolphin squealing. I don't even know how else to describe it.
I can only imagine.
I don't even know how else to describe it. So, of course, what happens is the entire class burst into laughter.
Right.
And I remember standing there, and of course, as a teacher, it's not, not funny to you. It's funny to the rest of the class. And I just felt defeated. And as I stood there and I was thinking, I didn't know how to react, I didn't know how to respond. I had prepared for all this instruction, and I just felt at that moment that it was wasted. And, the momentum was gone. There was chaos throughout the class, and I didn't really know what to do next. And so I remember standing there, and I ended up just moving on to the next activity we were going to do because I didn't know how to really get my students back on track after that disruption. And what I did was I reflected that evening and thought, I'm a big part of the problem. I realized, and this took much longer than that night. It took a few months of reflection, realizing that, when I first started teaching, that I was committed to compliance instead of really planning rigorous lessons for my students and having those high expectations for them. So I wanted students to sit and listen and learn as I taught, and that wasn't what was going to happen. Just, for students to sit there and listen to me teach and them learn. It wasn't going to happen. I had to provide them what they needed individually. And I had to provide them rigorous tasks that would require their effort and focus. And I didn't do that my first year teaching. So after kind of reflecting on my experience with him and really my experience with several of my other students and really my classes all together, I realized that, those high expectations were missing. And I spent that summer reflecting on that and, talking with educators and, teachers at my school and trying to decide how I could change my classroom expectations so that my students would be more successful the following year. And also change the expectations of myself. So, I was trying every day. I wanted to be better, but how could I put that into action and actually do something about it so that I could be a better teacher? And really what I decided was that I was going to choose one thing to focus on that next year that I thought would most impact my students. And what that was setting high expectations, behaviorally and academically. And so I really focused on that. But what I realized throughout that second year was that by setting that goal for myself and having high expectations for me to meet that goal, changed my classroom completely. And so every year after, I've chosen one big thing to work on so that I can become a better educator. And it's really changed my instruction completely, and next year when I go back into the classroom, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to reflect on this year and, my prior 4 years of teaching, and I'm going to say, this is what I want to work on this year because I think that we can always continue to grow. And so to me, reaching higher is setting those expectations and knowing that we always have room for improvement and also modeling that for our students because they need to see that we feel that way and that they can do that as well.
Right. Wow. And there's so much to unpack there. I think you hit on everything I've been thinking that we're going to get into in this podcast. The main one starting with this is on me. And that is a theme I think we keep seeing in every single teacher that we talk to is that sometimes it's easier for us to blame the kid making the dolphin noise at the back of the room, right? To say, what's going on with him today? And he totally ruined my lesson and I had everything going on just perfectly until that happened and getting mad at that situation or at the student. But it takes a whole other level of, I think, both maturity and reflection to say, I need to own this. What can I contribute to this? And I think that's a great mindset to have anyway, right? What can I control in this situation, not necessarily getting mad at the whole thing. So to start with that, I think is really reflective and to be able to say, I have a role in this and it can be better. And I think your story is really going to resonate a lot with, over 50% of our teachers right now that are non-ed majors, just like you. And who went into that very first year of teaching, it's going to be just like how I was in school, right? They're going to sit there. I love that compliance statement that you made. That it's they're going to sit here and they're going to listen as I impart my knowledge onto them, and it's just not like that. It's not like that. And if you had dug your feet in the ground and said it's going to be like this, you're going to comply, you're going to respect me, you're going to do this, I don't think that you'd have the success that you do. So that is fantastic. I love it. And so as far as setting high expectations, I love that you kind of like hit on all of that. Setting them for your students, I love that behaviorally and academically. That's so powerful because sometimes we pick one or the other, or we think, yeah, all my kids can do this, but then we don't think that kids who struggle with behavior can change. But it works the same way. And then also how we reach higher for ourselves and picking one thing that is so good, one thing to move on to. So we're going to hit all of that as we move forward. So let's start off by focusing on the expectations that you have for your students. I know when we talk to new teachers, a lot of times we'll hear, even experienced teachers really, oh my goodness, this child was so disrespectful, or this situation is going on with my classroom, or I have all these students who've performed so low on the state test before, and now I have to make these huge gains. Like all these issues that teachers can definitely resonate with. And so when we reply back with, you really got to set high expectations for your kids, it's one of those things you just kind of hear so much. You're like, okay, yeah, obviously, I do that. You know, what does that mean? So I'd love to dig into what does it look like? What does it sound like? What does it feel like in your classroom to really set high expectations for your kids?
Absolutely. So I'll start with behavior, and then I can talk about the academics. But behaviorally, I think that setting high expectations really goes back to those relationships. And it's not just building relationships, like you said, setting high expectations is so general, or building relationships with students is so general, but it's about getting to know them and, how they respond to things and things about their personal life. So I know, I've had students where I respond differently to one student versus another student because I know their needs are different. So for example, I had a student who was very upset about a situation in one of my classes, and I went over to talk to him, and he was very disrespectful. Raised his voice at me. He was, you could just tell he was angry. He was very upset about the situation that happened that had nothing to do with me, but he was taking it out on me. And I had to know that as a teacher, we can't take that personally. Our students they're going through things and they're going to react, and we have to make sure that we're modeling how to respond to that to our students. And so what I did was I sat there and I was like, listen, I'm going to give you a few minutes. I'm going to walk away, and then in like 10 minutes, I'm going to come back and we're going to talk about this. And when I did that, he was like, okay. So, he was still very frustrated. And I could tell for several minutes. So finally he calmed down and he was working on his math assignment. And so I finally went back over there, and the conversation was wonderful. We talked about his response and how I responded and kind of went through why he was so upset. And the whole conversation was yes, ma'am, and no, ma'am. And I'm so sorry I responded this way. I'm so sorry I talked to you. I should not have raised my voice. And he really took ownership of his response to him being angry and how he knew it wasn't okay. But I had to give him the opportunity to be able to respond in that way.
Right.
If I would have raised my voice or told him to stop being disrespectful or, had not been so understanding, the conversation would have been completely different.
Right.
He would have, his anger would have been heightened. And, he maybe would have ended up outside the classroom because he, got so upset, or, you never know. And that's just lost instructional time. So by giving those 5 or 10 minutes of, let's just cool down and talk about it in a few minutes, he was great. But I had to know and understand that that's what he needed. Right. And I think as teachers, going back to my first year, I didn't know that my first year. There were several times where I had students who, like you said, I thought it was going to be a certain way. I took what they said personally and I got upset, or I responded too quickly, and I had to take ownership of it and apologize to them. Because they might have not been acting the way that they should have been, but I also didn't as well.
Right.
And so I think learning that throughout the years has really helped me, but just knowing our students and showing them that we respect them just like they respect us. So in our classroom, that those high expectations of behavior, I think, is really us as teachers modeling that for our students, and also modeling the conversations between them. So, when they're working collaboratively or in groups or, doing activities, and you see maybe a conversation happening that might not be as productive,
right.
Going over there and helping them get through that conversation together so that there is mutual respect there, and making sure that they realize it's not okay to talk that way, and also letting them have that ownership of, improving and learning the skills that they need to learn to behave in the classroom.
Right.
So I think it's really just, knowing our students and responding to them.
And it's not like in that story, he has this behavior, or even this one we were saying where they're having this conversation that might be a little off topic, or for whatever reason they're having that. It's not that you're necessarily giving them a pass to continue to treat you disrespectfully or to have these major outbursts, and I'm just going to ignore the behavior and it's just going to I'm just going to pretend it's not happening when it's happening. You've addressed it, but you're also giving them the word opportunity to fix it, and you're teaching them how to grow. Because I think what we forget is you have, I don't know, how old are sixth graders?
12, 11, somewhere around there.
Yeah, they have 11 and 12-year-old brains. And sometimes I've done it 100 million times. I taught third grades. We were talking 8 and 9-year-olds. I'm trying to get an 8 and 9-year-old to reason like an adult. And just like you didn't know your first year teaching, you don't know what you don't know. So to teach them how to go to address stress or how to express themselves appropriately, they have to be given the opportunity. And I think that's that part where I want our teachers to hear. It's not that Chris is letting them do whatever they want. She's giving them time to cool off, just like she needs time to cool off. And then we're addressing it to let it know that's not how it needs to be, and this is how we're going to fix it so we can be productive.
Exactly. And I think as teachers, I'm not perfect.
Yeah.
And I own that with my students. They know that I'm not perfect. I apologize when I make mistakes. And so I think taking that and showing them that we're willing to apologize and say, I'm sorry, I overreacted. Or I'm sorry that I jumped to the conclusion that you were doing this when you weren't. And, showing them that we understand and that we're in that same situation as teachers and, we're not perfect, it just says a lot to them and allows them to model to do those same things that we're modeling for them.
Right. Absolutely. I saw on social media, one of those like images that has a nice quote on it and everything. It was a quote that talked about, if you value me, I'm going to perform to where you need me to perform. And that, I think it was talking more about the workplace. And don't we feel like that, right? If you don't feel like your principal or your administrator values the work that you do, what would make you want to continue to overperform, right? Instead you're like, what does it matter? I'm just going to clock in, clock out, leave. Where if you feel valued, if that administrator is pouring into you and recognizing you and saying, hey, I appreciate the work that you're doing, you want to do more. And I think that's the same way in building relationships with your students. They'll reach those high expectations you set for them, but it goes hand in hand with having a relationship with them and valuing them and seeing them for the individuals that they are.
Absolutely. I definitely think it's with, same with students and that relationship. And I think it's good too, like that you bring that up, for them to see our relationships with coworkers.
Right.
So not even just, our relationships with students, but for them to see how we respond in conversations with, the teacher next door or at lunch duty when we're having conversations with teachers. Because again, they're always watching and we're modeling for them what the workplace looks like and what productive conversations and relationships look like.
Right.
So it just goes back to, they're learning, they're students, they're kids, they don't know it all yet. That's when you learn. And so being able to give them that it means everything.
Right. That's such a great point. That's true. You don't think that like we have ourselves in our classroom and sometimes we kind of shut that off when we're talking to the teacher next door. Yeah. And like they can hear you. They're right there. They can still hear you. I would be remiss if I didn't mention, because this ties so perfectly with some really incredible research that's come out of TNTP, the opportunity myth. And you had mentioned you did a book study with the math team at your school. And so for those that have never heard of this, it is this really incredible amount of research coming from TNTP, which is the New Teacher Project. And they basically surveyed high school kids from around the country and really trying to drill into are kids not are they not wanting to go to college? Is it that they don't want to succeed? Or is it something else? And so in some of the research, we found that 94% of the kids said that they wanted to go to college. 94%, most of them, right? And that I think 70% of them actually were pursuing jobs they would need a degree for. But what was really insane was that 40% of the kids that go to college have to take remedial courses, which would be courses that technically if you passed high school, you should have completed already. And then the statistics with that, even going down that rabbit trail, even just taking one remedial course in college, there's a 75% chance you won't graduate. And it's about a $3,000 debt accumulation if you're taking out student loans. And so they really were kind of coming backwards into like, where is this coming from? How are we graduating all these kids who then go to college and have to take high school courses that they don't get credit for, but they have to pay for, right? And so what was really interesting, we're going to put the link to the opportunity myth in the show notes. It's a really neat interactive research. So it's not like you're just sitting and reading tons and tons and tons of information. It's really interactive and engaging and honestly shocking. You should leave completely kind of like just shocked, really, that this is happening. But we have, and in this research, they talk about how out of the students that they surveyed, that most of the students that were there spent 500 hours, which is equivalent to 6 months, on work that wasn't appropriate for their grade level. 500 hours, 6 months. And then it goes into really focus on students of color and how students of color compared to students who are mostly white classrooms are 4 times less likely to get on grade level work. And I remember seeing that for the first time and being completely shocked in that they had all this research to prove this. And then saying, that can't be. And with now, because you don't know what you don't know, after seeing that, going into different classrooms, even here in Polk County, and interacting with different teachers, you start to see this is real. This is happening. And it starts with expectations you have in your classroom. And setting those expectations and really taking a deep look onto, is this high quality resources that I'm using, and do I have high expectations for my kids? And so the last piece of data I want to throw in there that was really neat is that for these students, which so many of us have that are below grade level already, by pairing those two, the high quality resources with those high expectations like you're talking about, there's an average growth of 7 months to close the achievement gap. So I think now more than ever, we really need those high expectations, especially with so many kids coming off of distance learning, and they're even further behind.
Absolutely. Like you said, I did a book study with my math team, really our whole math team at Yearling in Okeechobee at my middle school, and a few years ago. And I remember reading it, and I went through and I highlighted and circled, and it was so engaging for me to read. And it was because I was shocked and stunned and couldn't believe the data that was being presented. And, but it's there and it's in front of you. And then it kind of it's a call to action. It's, what are you going to do about this at your school, in your classroom, at your, within your district? What are you going to do? And how can you support, your students in your classroom, but also colleagues at your school, and make sure that we're all providing these students what they need so that they can go to college, or are given the opportunity to go to college and not have to take those remedial courses. And, that's something else when I reflect back that I didn't do before, and it was those rigorous assignments. And, grade appropriate assignments are so important and essential for our students to be able to master the skills that we're teaching, but also for the teacher to believe that every single student can master those skills. So, you might have a student come in that's a couple years behind in math, but I'm not going to give that student 4th grade material or 5th grade material. They're going to be held accountable for these 6th grade standards. And it's my job as the teacher to support them so that they can master those skills. So that's something that I am very passionate about, because I feel that all students can and should be able to succeed in that grade level. And looking at that data and the opportunity myth, again, just really lights a fire for you to make sure that you're doing that in your classroom and also across your district.
Right. And how you're talking about that with, I'm not going to give them 4th grade level work, even though I'm in 6th grade and they're 2 years behind. That I feel like when I was looking at it, I'm like, how can that be? Who would come in and give them a coloring worksheet or something? But I think where we get sucked down that rabbit hole is in differentiating instruction. And can you talk about that? Like, what's the balance between meeting kids where they are, but then also having high expectations and getting them grade level work?
Absolutely. So in my classroom, we use learning scales at my school and use Marzano's taxonomy. So every unit we have a learning scale, and our students track their learning progress. Okay. So within this learning scale, they usually start at a level 1, and then their goal is to get to a level 3, which is mastery. Okay. And then a level 4 is kind of beyond mastery, and it's really utilizing those skills they've learned in some way, in some kind of maybe in the real world, or really using those skills beyond just what the standard's calling for. And so my students track their progress, but what happens is, we have students who struggle and they need that additional support. And so if the students are stuck between a level 2 or a level 1, or, they can't quite get to mastery, that's when they're monitoring their progress and I'm monitoring their progress, and we're pulling them back to small group. But it's not to work on those previous grade level standards.
Right.
It's, there's some times where we fill some gaps. If I'm sitting at a small group table and I see a student struggling with a 6th grade standard, and it's because there's something they're struggling with from the previous grade, I might spend a few minutes working on that specific skill that they're missing during that small group instruction, but I'm not going to spend 20 minutes working on it. We're going to fill that gap and, try and support that student the best we can while we're working on those grade level standards. So I think sometimes we forget that, and we, as teachers, think, okay, well, they have to master this completely in order to learn this skill. And I don't think that's necessarily it.
Right.
I think that we're taking those pieces, just the pieces they're missing, and we're filling them in while we're working with them in that small group, or while we're sitting there working with them one-on-one on those skills that they're struggling with.
And when I evaluate how I probably have contributed to this, that's where I think my struggle was, especially when I was brand new to teaching and I'm doing small groups. I see, oh my goodness, this kid doesn't know how to add and subtract with regrouping. So I'm going to sit here and I'm going to spend tons and tons and tons of time. And then because my expectations are going to play a role in this, I'm going to say, well, they can't really do any of this other stuff. And that's where I leave them. Even more so, I feel like I remember one year I taught 3rd grade, and there was a student there who could barely spell his name. And then how am I trying to get him to read 3rd grade level text? And so it is this balance of trying to help him get the phonics part, and even some other elements, and bringing in support, from other teachers. Like, the special education teacher. But if he never sees 3rd grade level or grade level text, I'm already setting him up to fail. Right. And if I never challenge my kids to get to where they need to be, then there's no reason to even bother, spending this time working with them, because you're already setting them up for failure. There was one teacher I know I had talked to a few years ago, and we were going through, did collaborative type of activities. And so she was talking about a set of students in her class, and they were all answering, but it was mostly like the same kids answering over and over again. And then the other kids were kind of just copying down their answers. And so we're talking about, I'm like, how are they performing on their tests? And she's like, oh, yeah, they're doing good. But, I mean, there's obviously, the ones that don't get it, they get zeros. But everyone else, is doing really well. And so it's like, but what about the kids that get zeros, and how do we support them? And I think that's part of wrapping your mind around what you expect your kids to do is what they will do. And it really just comes down to that if your kids know. If I consistently give you addition worksheets when the rest of the class is getting division worksheets, they know that they can't do it, and so they're going to perform that they can't do it.
Well, and I've noticed too, with using the learning scales that we use at my school and the Marzano's taxonomy, that my students are advocating for themselves. And so when they notice that they're at a level 1 or a level 2 on our learning scale, they interact with that scale daily.
Yeah.
And so when they notice that, they'll advocate for themselves, and they'll say, like, Mrs. Stanley, can you bring me back to small group because I don't get this part?
That's awesome.
And it's like, okay, if their students are advocating for themselves, you're just here to facilitate.
Right.
You're here to support and facilitate, which is what good instruction is, So it's just incredible. And my students didn't do that when I first started teaching. That's something that I think the relationships and also the high expectations have allowed to happen. But, for them to advocate and say, like, I want to do better and I don't know how to do this, please help me. All I have to do is support them.
Right.
They're ready to learn and they're willing to learn, and they know I believe them, and they know that I know they can do it. And so they then believe in themselves, like you're saying. So it makes all the difference.
Right. I love it. And for those in our listening audience who are like, I have no idea what a learning scale is, I'm going to pretend I know what they're talking about. We'll definitely include some links in there. I know now this is really great to do cross-district collaboration. We have Okeechobee and Polk County. And people do different things. And so I definitely want to include what you use. And then I'll also make sure that in our show notes, we include what our district is using that's similar or identical to that. But it's powerful because you put the ownership on the students, which really then long term, after they leave Miss Stanley's class, they can still have that skill.
Absolutely.
So moving on now to reaching higher for teachers, you mentioned that opening story about being reflective. And you mentioned you work on something every single year, right? You have a goal. So I assume that we're kind of going in that direction. But what does that look like for teachers to reach higher for themselves?
I think it's recognizing that, students have strengths and weaknesses, and our goal is to, support them in those weaknesses. And as teachers, we have the same. And I think whether you've been teaching for 4 or 5 years like me or 20 years, you can always get better. Right. I always say that I wish I could go back to my first year teaching and give those students what I can give my students now. And I hope that in 5 years, I can say the same thing about my students now, that I wish, I've improved my practice so much that I wish I could give these students what I, can give my students then.
Right.
And so, but I think that in order to do that, we have to commit to learning and commit to growth and know that it's never okay to stop learning. So like I said, what I do every year is I choose one practice or something that I think is going to best benefit my students or have the most impact on my students. And usually what I do at the end of the year, I give my students an anonymous survey so that they feel comfortable answering questions freely. And they respond to questions about my class and, how they felt in my class or what they think my strengths and my weaknesses are and how I can be a better teacher. And sometimes they get some goofy answers, but most of the time they respond really honestly. And there's always room for improvement. And so they'll put on there what they think, if they want more individual time or if they think that I maybe need more small group time. Like they're very honest or, they kind of reflect on the year and I give them plenty of time and they turn it in and I tell them they can put their name on it, but they don't have to put their name on it.
Right.
And I don't even look at it for like a week because you can tell they're nervous. Like if I'm watching,
with me.
Yeah.
I
like
the
they
hearts
watch,
on my eye.
Yes. They will watch me or they think that I'm like watching them put it in the bin. And, so I'll tell them like, I'm not going to look at it for like a week. So it'll sit over there for a week in this pile with no name. And then I'll look at it over the summer so that, I have no idea who is who.
Right.
And I go and I read through them and usually I get my FSA data back, which I know, was different last year. But I usually get my FSA data back soon after that. And I really spend a lot of time reflecting on that year. So I look through the surveys, I see what my students thought about the year, and then I look at my FSA data and I analyze where I could improve, if there's a certain domain in my standards that I can improve on or a specific area or maybe a specific group of students that I didn't support the way that I should so that I can make that change the following year. And really after all of that reflection, I try and choose something. And so I know a few years ago, I started working on using a daily monitoring tool in my classroom. And that was kind of after reflecting on needing more individualized supports for my students and also my principal's advice. And when I started using that daily monitoring tool, I struggled. And it took me a lot of, I wanted to give up on it. I didn't want to use it. And basically this tool is essentially just a spreadsheet that allows me to document my students' needs so that none of my students are getting left behind. And so what it did was it allowed me to write specifically what students needed, whether that be enrichment or whether that be a specific type of remediation that was preventing them from mastering a set of skills. And so I was able to provide all of my students what they needed to be successful. But I almost gave up on using that tool several times because it wasn't working.
Right.
And what I noticed was that I had to adapt that tool until it fit my needs so that it was natural to me.
Right.
And so it's changed 5 or 6 times and I finally love it and it's become so natural to me, but it's because I didn't give up on it. And I decided this is what I'm going to work on this year and this is what I'm going to master, and I did.
Right.
And it's changed my instruction completely and allowed me to really provide that individualized support.
Yeah. And then I bet you see that correlation then between student performance because you didn't give up on it.
Absolutely.
It was worth it.
Well, even I go back if it kind of goes back to advocating, students advocating for themselves. So they know what this tool is for, but they don't get to see it. This tool is only for me to document their needs. So if I'm working with a small group, my clipboard's flipped upside down and my students are not looking at it and they know they're not allowed to see it.
Right.
But they'll come up to me and say like, I I need you to write this down because I don't know this, or I do know this. Like, they'll tell me to write it down so that I can be pulled back for small group, or write it down because this is what I know. Like, they get a little bossy, which I love because, again, they're advocating for themselves, but they know what I'm doing, and they know that I'm taking the time to care about them individually and their academic progress. And so they're doing the same. They're owning their progress or their struggles and saying, these are the next steps for me to achieve my goals.
I think bigger picture here too is they're watching you model what it looks like to be reflective and to make mistakes. We talk about growth mindset all the time, right? And a lot of people, I think, do have an idea, general idea, but when we say, I want you to make mistakes, it's an open classroom, but everything's a grade, or everything has such a major consequence, and we're not reflective ourselves, it really doesn't do any good. And so I think that's so powerful, one, for them to see Miss Stanley is struggling with this new tool, but she's not giving up, and she's doing this. But even more so, how often do we do things that we know are good for kids, are going to help us be a better teacher, but we don't explain to our students that that's what we're doing, and just be totally transparent with the teaching process. I think it could be twofold in positive outcomes. One, of course, because our job is to work on teacher retention and recruitment. I think you could show that teaching is a more challenging and exciting profession if you were really open with your students like that, because that's their world of getting to see, do I want to become a teacher or not? But then, two, getting to them to see this is a part of the process, and I get to learn what this is and what you do, and then to be able to say, hey, I know that you're writing this down not because I'm bad or because I'm not smart, but because you are helping me at every piece along the way. So much so that I keep saying advocate for myself and saying, Ms. Stanley, I don't know if you noticed this, but I'm actually struggling with this one. So please write this down too.
Absolutely. I mean, it makes all the difference. And for the students, their confidence is just constantly increasing because of it. So I know before, students would be embarrassed to come back to the small group table because to them that meant it's showing the whole class that, I can't do this yet. But it's created a classroom culture of it's okay to come back here because we're all here to support each other. It's okay to maybe be paired up with a student who has mastered this skill so that they can peer coach me. It's really allowing them to see that we're all here for each other because we all want to be able to do these skills because that's our goal. That's why we're here. We're here to support each other, and we're here to learn. And as the teacher, I love that you made that comment about showing them that, we're learning. I had a few years ago, our administration changed, and we were talking a lot about collaborative learning. And I thought collaborative learning was different than the way that my principal and leadership team was kind of describing it. And so I was struggling. And this is in my third year teaching. And I just didn't really understand or pick up on what they were trying to how it looked in the classroom, really. And so I struggled, and the reading coach came in and I opened up my classroom to her, and I was like, okay, come show me. Like, I don't understand. So before she came in, I told my students, that the reading coach was coming in and she was going to model an activity. And it was because she was coaching me on how to do this activity and really helping me with collaborative learning. And I was very transparent and open with them about that. And they, I think, thought it was so cool that someone was normally we're here to learn or teach them so they can learn. And now someone else is coming in to teach my teacher. Like, it just was so different for them to hear.
And she's not embarrassed about it?
And she's being so open about it. And so I think that it is really important and, to do that more often, to say, they're here to help me learn so I can help you better. You help you be better. So I do think that's really important. I love that you said that because I think just reflecting back on that moment a few years ago where she came in and the students were kind of like, okay,
we're going to do this.
We're going to do this. And, my teacher's learning and we're watching her learn and we're getting to participate in it. I just think they kind of took some ownership in it as well.
For sure.
So it was super cool.
I had a similar situation with my third graders the very first time I had done that. And they looked at me like, are you in trouble? Why are you doing that? And so then it becomes a norm. And so hopefully with our listeners, they're able to hear that. Like, you need to have other teachers in your classroom. You got to make your practice public. But how awesome too, like a bonus, to be able to tell your students, I'm growing too. I want to be better than this.
Absolutely.
And it's okay to not be perfect at everything. That's awesome. Well, Krista, we always end our show with the same question. This is the Ignite Project. We want teachers to hear other teachers who are passionate about what they do. We want them to really get on fire and feel ignited to do something in their classrooms, in their district. So we always ask the same one. If you could ignite anything in education, what would that be?
I would say that I would want to ignite a passion for professional growth. And to me, that means so much. Like I said, it's the academics, it's the relationship building in the classroom, but also committing each year to learning something new. You know, wherever you're at in your practice, you can always continue to learn, or whatever position you're in education, we all can learn. So really igniting that passion of wanting to learn and seeking out that professional growth and choosing something to work on. And, you know, that's something that I want to challenge myself with each year. What can I be better at? And I'm going to make a goal to be better at that and continue to reflect on that throughout the year so that I can be a better educator.
I love it. I think that's why you are where you're at as Florida Teacher of the Year. So congratulations. And thank you so much for this. This is absolutely fantastic. If I was listening right now as new teacher, experienced teacher, I would be have a page full of notes for one thing and then be so inspired. So we appreciate you coming on the show today.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I enjoyed it.
Great.
Are you fired up? You can hear more from teachers like this by joining in teacher engagement events. You won't want to miss out on monthly virtual new teacher seminars, as well as major events like EdCamp and Emerge Symposium. Check out all of our upcoming events by following Teacher Engagement on social media at Teach Engage PCPS or visiting the Teacher Engagement page on the Hub.
Thanks for joining us. You can subscribe to the Ignite Project on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or Spotify, or watch online at the Polk County Public Schools YouTube channel. To learn more about the Ignite Project and other Polk County Public School podcasts, go to polkschoolsfl.com/podcasts.